Like I didn't know it was going to go viral. I didn't know how much work it would be. I just kind of assumed that like these apps would just solve the problem. 3 weeks later, he was like, "What if I invest $100,000 and you start a company and you come to my accelerator?"
All right. Rae, welcome to the podcast. One of the reasons why I was excited to have this conversation is because even thinking about my own career path, kind of random experiences and also curiosities have emerged over time that has led me to converge just on this increasing conviction about the role that digital communities will play in the future. And I hadn't shared this with you beforehand, but I originally started my career on Wall Street, and then I had left after about 2 years to join a startup. And that startup was it was basically a digital community for investment professionals. So there's like a famous podcaster in the investing space who had been an early mover to the podcasting space. And because of the network that he had built, he had thought, hey, maybe I can build kind of a digital ecosystem for investment professionals around the world. And he had a deep network at that point. And one of the things that I was doing for that company was working in like business operations. And originally I really had no interest in the whole like digital community building space. It was kind of a serendipitous thing of how it came up.
Kind of sounds like bullshit, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had realized, or that the team realized after like 1 or 2 years, was it's very hard to get people that are in their 50s and their 60s into a digital first ecosystem. And one of the things that they were craving was in person events. And so we started to pop up events in New York City, in LA, in Austin, Texas. And even though those were quite successful, we had kind of shut the company down for a variety of reasons. But one of them being like, hey, we are not an events company. We don't see the future of this as being an events company first. We wanted this to really be a digital ecosystem. And because of that, we kind of closed the books there. But your company, River, kind of solves a lot of the pain points that we had in those early days. And so I'd love if you would be willing just to maybe introduce yourself and share a little bit about what River is and kind of how it came to be.
Thanks for having me, Tiger. Well, first of all, congrats on starting your career in finance and then leaving because I also did that.
Hmm.
Um, I, s- I slogged it out a little longer. I was in custodial finance for 6 years before switching into startups.
Wow.
Absolutely fucking hated it. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I'm Rae Lambert, co-founder of River. River is we're still figuring out how to call ourselves and how to describe ourselves, but we are an in-person event platform. We basically turn your audience into hosts and let your community get together without you having to do any work.
Hmm.
And so the platform is a lot like Uber or Airbnb, where Uber isn't buying a fleet of cars and we're not managing a ton of events. Instead of a Uber driver coming and bringing their own car, someone who's really active in your community steps up to host and they find the venue and they do some of the work to produce the event. It's usually very casual meetups, but the River platform orchestrates that. It gives them a playbook of everything they need to do. It annoys the hell out of them if they don't pick a location. There's tons of kind of role-based access control so that you as a community brand or owner can say this person's allowed to do that, or they're allowed to get those emails, or they're not allowed to do that. So you can really just turn your audience into a community and into a workforce of event hosts, planners for you. And yeah, we are very new, just getting started, but it's working so far.
Amazing. If I remember correctly, River is a little bit over a year old, and I know that the kind of founding story was a little bit serendipitous. So can you tell me a little bit about like how River came to be and why you thought it needed to exist?
Yeah, it was very serendipitous. I was not looking to start a SaaS company. Um, I started my career in finance, like I said. I pivoted into startups. I was kind of in this like hybrid finance operations role. at a company called Sauce Labs. Ended up pivoting further into marketing, and I got a product marketing job at a company called Intercom, which is now pretty well known. Did a few years there, launched a couple products, and then co-founded a product marketing agency, which I was running since 2018. Was quite successful. Was doing nearly 2 million a year in annual revenue. Great team. No meetings on Fridays. Was not looking to like chew glass and stare into the abyss and start a company, another company. Um, Olivine marketing is like still exists and it's trucking, but was like very lifestyle, like very comfortable lifestyle business.
Hmm.
But after COVID, so I've lived in San Francisco, New York, Miami. Um, I lived in San Francisco for 7 years and then moved to New York to be closer to family. I'm originally from the East Coast, but we're not real New Yorkers. COVID kicked us out. We ended up doing some long-term travel, and we're just living out of like a backpack and a bicycle and a laptop,
Wow.
traveling around. And during our travels, I went to the All In Summit, the first All In
Hmm.
Summit, which was a 2 day conference of the early days of the All In podcast. And I noticed that a lot of women were insecure about attending a heavily male dominated event.
Hmm.
My background's in finance and startups, so I do not care. I don't even notice when I'm the only woman in the room. I don't care. But I know that a lot of women do. So I was like, okay, let me make a brunch reservation and put together a brunch and just help some of the women break the ice. I invited Jason Calacanis to the brunch, not expecting him to come at all. But I was like, hey, if you want to stop by and take a selfie, this is where we'll be. I won't tell anyone I've invited you, so no need to say no.
Hmm.
Um, and he ended up coming to brunch and spending like 2 hours eating brunch with us and buying brunch. So at the summit, I would, and a lot of selfies were taken, and a lot of people in the restaurant were going to the summit. And so, like when Jason entered, they all cheered. So, which so all the unofficial besties revealed themselves. But at the summit, I was known as Brunch Girl, which was very unserious, kind of fine, don't care, but funny.
Hmm.
And one of the women I met at the brunch, Melissa Varelli, super impressive. She was working on free speech at Meta as a lawyer. I After the summit, I moved to Miami, and she was going to host an episode 100 listening party in San
Hmm.
Francisco. And she's like, "Where in the world are you, Ray? Come out for my listening party." I was like, "Oh, that sounds great, but I just moved to Miami. I'm trying to like make Miami a thing that I do." But I had been going to a bunch of tech meetups and was just not meeting real, like serious builders or people my age. I was meeting, the tech meetups in Miami are like big. It's like 200 people, music's blasting, like very strong cocktails. It's a fun vibe. Um, like 20-year-old guys who like Bitcoin is their entire personality. Like I love Bitcoin, I own Bitcoin, but it's not, the only thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and so, Melissa invited me to her listening party. I was like, maybe I should host a listening party here and I could meet like a handful of all in people because I really enjoyed who I met at the summit. I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I'll do that. And then I got bold and I was like, oh, I DM'd J Cal once and invited him to my brunch. Maybe he'll respond to my DM a second time. So I DM'd him and I was like, hey, I'm hosting a listening party for episode 100. I think you should live stream the pod and tell me what time it is so I can
Hmm.
plan my party. And he was like, "Oh, the besties don't want to live stream it, but I like this party idea. Make a sign up form and like I'll retweet it." And I was like, "Okay." So I made an Airtable and it said SF, for Melissa, Miami for me, and then I had just spent 6 weeks in Austin. I knew a bunch of people in Austin, so I was like, "Okay, Austin, Texas, that'll be the third choice." And then, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Boston, maybe one other city will want to do it. So I put other right in your city.
Hmm.
And do you want to host? Check this box because someone has to host it. I'm not there. And juicy people would like apply to host in their city. Like, of course, New York was next. And I was like, oh, that person looks dope. James looks awesome. Okay, sure. So then I added New York to the list. And then someone would be like, oh, I'll host in Chicago. I'm like, okay. And then I'd add Chicago to the list. So the drop down just kind of kept getting longer. And then the form went viral. I guess people were like texting it to each other. I'm not really sure. But we ended
Mm.
up hosting event meetups, listening parties in 24 cities.
Wow.
And there was no tech. It was an Airtable, and I would BCC the email, like everyone who put Chicago or London, whatever. I just BCC them and like created a calendar invite, and like can't see the attendees on the calendar, like the Google
Mm.
Calendar. This is all it was. And I had major data problems because I didn't. It's kind of, you could cut this out of the pod, but people selected multiple cities, and I didn't realize that people selected multiple cities. So if they
Mm.
selected multiple cities, they did not get an email from me because I did like, city is Miami, not contains Miami.
Yep.
So 1,000 people got together in 24 cities, and it probably could have been bigger if I wasn't an idiot with my Airtable rules. And I was like, wow, that was crazy and weird. I don't know why, like, I don't know how that happened. I don't know what happened, but it was just like a little magical. I had a great time. I met a bunch of people in Miami. It kind of kickstarted my friend group there. Um, while I was doing that, I created a Slack because I did not want to like answer all these hosts one on one in emails. So I was like, come to Slack and I'll just like answer questions publicly. Um, so the Slack grew. I think it has like 2,600 people in the Slack now. And then
Wow.
I thought that was it. And I ran the email list through Apollo, and I was like, oh, some juicy people in here. But for the most part, I was just like, oh, that was weird. And now I can meet someone for coffee if I go to Zurich because there was a bunch of people in Zurich. I was just like, okay, that's the big outcome. I wasn't really thinking that much about it. But 6 months later, episode 125 was coming around, and someone was like, hey, Ray, like, we're doing it again, right? I was like, fuck no. You have no idea how much work that was. Why did I do that? Why did I pull like two all-nighters planning meetups that I'm not going to? I don't know. But then like 30 people asked me, and I was like, oh shit, okay. Let me, there's got to be an app for this. Surely this is solved. Let me,
Mm.
let me just figure it out. So I was like, I've been using Partiful, I've been using Luma, obviously I'm familiar with Meetup, obviously I know Eventbrite, I know Facebook groups, like I know what's going on with events and stuff. I was like, okay, I'll get a Luma Pro account and I'll like get API access and I'll hook that into my Airtable and I like set up some Zapier automations like welcomes or whatever, welcome emails, and I was like, we'll be good to go. Done.
Mm.
It was so much more work than the Google Calendars because now the expectation is just like higher. Like now it ended up being 50 cities, not 24. Now we're having all these data sharing issues because as soon as well, first of all, just creating the events is very time consuming. And now Luma kind of expects that you have an image. So now I need to like upload a city image for each event. And then, you know, host was like hard to find. I would reach out to the last host and be like, you want to host again? They'd be like, yeah, sure. So I'd add them to the event. And then they'd be like, no, I just meant sometime. I was like, no, well, they're simultaneous, like worldwide meetups. It has to be this day.
Mm.
And then some hosts would just like say they would do it. I would add them. They would ghost. Or some would like delete my blurb about all in meetups I had set up. So then now no one can like, there's no cohesive community. No one can find us in Slack or like follow us on Twitter to find out about the next one. A bunch of hosts like download the attendee list emails and subscribe them to their bullshit newsletter that like no one wants to read. And so it's just like a lot of headaches, but
Mm.
we did
Mm-hmm.
it. So I ended up pulling like 6 people off my marketing team at Olivine to help just get through it. Because again, I
Wow.
just like each time I've done it, I was like, it's not going to be that much work. Like I didn't know it was going to go viral. I didn't know how much work it would be. I just kind of assumed that like these apps would just solve the problem. So then after the second one, we did 50 cities, so like 2,000 people. Jason messaged me and he's like, holy shit, how the hell did you pull off 50 meetups? Like, is this even real? I'm like, no, it's real. Believe me, the sleepless nights, it's very real. He's like, how did you do that? Like, I have full-time event people who can only do like 20 events a year. And it's like, well, I'm not planning them. Like, I'm just making everybody else do it.
Mm.
Um, and so he's like, oh, I want to hire you. And I was like, love you, but I do not want to work. I'm an outdoor cat. I don't want to work for you or anyone,
Mm.
I don't want to work anywhere. I already have my own company. And like also I don't want to be an events manager. Like I run like a really successful product marketing agency. Like with big clients like Meta and Twilio and Mercury Bank. I'm,
Mm,
I'm not going to leave to be an events manager. Um, he's like, okay, well, what about a consulting situation? I was like, okay, here's the price. And he's like, that's too much money. I was like, well, it's a lot of work, and this was the discount because I want to work with you. This was not me price gouging you.
mm.
And then not right, and then it's like silence. I was like, okay. And then 3 weeks later, he was like, what if I invest $100,000 and you start a company and you come to my accelerator? And I was like, hmm. I didn't jump on it at first because I'm like such a bootstrap type person.
Mm.
Um, but ultimately, curiosity killed the cat. And I was like, how many times, how many chances in my life or am I gonna, finding an idea is so hard. Like finding a problem to solve is very hard.
Yep.
Like one that has like real potential in the market, How many times am I going to get offered like an investment with 0 lines of code written? Zero
Yep.
lines of code like have been written. So I was just like, you know what? I'll always wonder what if. So let me just follow this and like see what happens. So we started building River about 18 months ago.
Wow. Wow. That's a crazy backstory. And even the this process of putting events together like you did initially for the All In podcast, was this something that was in your history as well in terms of like spinning up events? Was that like a common thing that you did? Or was this all
No,
like very new?
very personally. So like not professionally. So I my husband and I always have hosted. Like we always host. We love to host Thanksgiving. We host an epic Christmas party. We love gathering people. We love having dinner parties. We love taking people hiking. We've always
Mm,
been gatherers, but always for personal reasons, not like for work things. I mean, I was kind of involved with the Selenium meetups that Sauce Labs was running when I was working there. I'd kind of like help plan those, but it was just like just order the pizza and show up and say hi to people. It wasn't like me trying to build this community of, automated browser testing developers. Um, so yeah, no, it's just always been purely personal for hosting and gathering people. And I definitely am good at it and I have opinions about it, but never planned on doing it at scale.
mm. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting for me to listen to this story as well because even for myself, like personally, I have never really had that much of an interest in, let's say, like digital communities. And I'm very much like a hyper introvert. But podcasts have been a big part of my whole learning journey. I just started to consume podcasts voraciously when I was in undergrad and even afterwards. And it motivated me to start my own podcast. But even in
Love
seeing
it.
kind of a natural community emerge around people that share my same interests and passions. This kind of community emergent phenomenon happens naturally, and maybe one of the best
Yeah.
proxies in terms of whether or not I get along with somebody else is if they're a podcast listener. If I could just see the podcast that they listen to, I would have like a 90% hit rate in terms of will I get along with this person or not. And so it really seems like just from a
Totally.
social organization perspective that this is kind of one of the big areas that River is serving.
Yeah, I mean, All In, for example, especially All In, like the more controversial, almost the better of like a touchstone it is, because
Yeah.
it's like, everyone, there's just certain things that are like news programs, like, NPR, whatever, fresh air on NPR. Like, there's just nothing edgy about it, or so you're not really like, I don't know, you're not sorting anyone like this, the sorting hat. Whereas All In is more politically open-minded. Not everyone is a Republican, but like for a lot of liberal tech people, it's the
Mm.
only time they've ever met a Republican.
Yeah.
Um, so and then also just the nature of the pod like comes out on Friday nights and like comes out on the weekend and my husband and I usually listen to it on Friday night. If we have plans, we'll listen to it Saturday morning, but like, there's just like a certain kind of lunatic that's just like listening to, deep podcasts and um yeah, you people who are interested in a certain topic, it's very juicy, it's very heavy. I just think it creates like an instant connection and that's how I feel about I go to a lot of different types of meetups that are on River, not just All In, but My First Million. Don't Die, Brian Johnson events. Like when I hosted the one in Boston, and it was like 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. It's pouring rain out. It was freezing. It wasn't even nice out. And everyone was giddy because they didn't know that there were 30 other vegans who want to go to sleep at 9 p.m. in the
Mm,
city.
wow.
And so they just, you just kind of like instantly connect, and you just know you have something in common when you get together in this way. So it's really interesting. And then, I feel like the word like digital community is just like a little broken because it's really not community. I mean, it's just like a message board. I don't know. To me, community is more like you have shared rituals, you're getting together more regularly, it's give and take. It's
Mm,
not just, oh, if someone says something you don't like, it's like, well, you got to work through it because you got to look these people in the eye all the time,
yep.
whereas I feel like digital communities can be a little more ephemeral, but or like, certain when you're like the Reddit community, I'm like, is this a community? I don't know. This is just people like yelling at each other.
Yep.
But yeah, which is still fun and entertaining in its own way, but I personally don't think it's community. But yeah, there's just something about getting together in person that is very magical. I mean, obviously, we've been doing it for our entire existence, so it's important to us. I do think after COVID, some like huge shifts happened.
Mm,
People dispersed out of major cities, myself included. Um, People moved back to their hometowns or they moved to the suburbs, and then they're shifting their priorities, but they really want to meet like-minded people. But these people are very hard to find. We don't just like wear stickers on our heads saying that we listen to Lex Friedman. Um, so this river often is like a catalyst for meeting like people who really align with your values, like really deeply, and that they will as soon as you meet everyone. So now I'm pretty much happy to talk to anybody at the meetup, if it's with like under a certain specific kind of topic. So yeah, I think we're entering a new era, and I think people are a little tired of Zoom meetings and webinars and online stuff.
mm. Yeah, one of the reasons why I get a lot of value out of this podcast is because I have the opportunity to speak with people who have had like multi-decade careers, and oftentimes those involve some pretty transformational shifts. And I'm curious for you because you had mentioned that like you started in finance, you started your own marketing agency, and now you've become a founder. In terms of the trajectory and also like the aspirations, was there always a hope? Because I mean, you mentioned that you were in the all-in kind of ecosystem and have been a listener. Was your hope always to like one day be a founder, or was that more so the opportunity came up and you decided to kind of seize it for what it was?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't work in startups without hoping that you could start your own, I don't think you work in startups for that long without hoping you could start your own because you're there to learn and because you don't always make that much money and it's a lot of hard work. So, you are kind of there because you can make more money a lot easier. There's a lot easier ways to make money than working in a startup, I think. Yeah, so I wanted to start a startup someday. I mean, to be clear, I was a founder of our marketing agency, but not in it was bootstrapped and it's an agency. So you're just kind of always trading time for money. And despite, I would say we were particularly successful, but you still don't have the outsized kind of upside. Um, and, but the more startups I worked in, the less likely I thought it was that I would start one just because like Sauce would be considered successful. It's still going on. They have millions of customers, but has never had a liquidation event and just can't, I think, just it's trucking along, but certainly like wasn't maybe a VC backable business or maybe made too many mistakes along the way. And then Intercom, extremely successful. I worked really closely with Des and Owen, the two of the four co-founders. I was like an early product marketer there. I sat one row over from them, learned a ton and watched them do pretty much everything nearly perfectly.
Mm,
I thought they made incredible decisions, incredible product, incredible everything. Um, and they haven't IPO'd, so it's just when you watch it done nearly perfectly and you still see how like they've just been slogging at it for longer than over 10 years. And, you just see how hard it is. You're like, wow, I don't know if I'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
And it's funny to say ideas are cheap. And I think most ideas are cheap, but actually coming up with an idea for a company that is like venture scale, that is not already solved, that has a market you can penetrate, like I don't have that many of those ideas.
Yeah.
These kind of ideas are actually really hard to come by.
Mm.
And then, being able to align all the stars is like find the right, build the right team. And then, you could have been building a great business and then COVID happened and all of a sudden everything changed. Just so many like things outside of your control. And so um, I didn't really think I would ever start like a real software startup just because the like finding the right idea, the right problem to solve that actually had a viable market just seemed hard.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, even for myself. So I hadn't shared this beforehand, but I'm in Seoul. I just moved here 2.5 months ago, and I am in the process of launching and founding a digital community for like the Korean diaspora. So Koreans, Korean Americans, Korean Canadians, kind of bridging people to Seoul and to each other. And I had seen this done, a few examples of this done in the Vietnamese diaspora and in the Pakistani diaspora. But even in the early stages, it was like, I think this thing should exist. I'm not exactly sure what this is and how to explain it to other people and why it should exist. I'm still in that kind of discovery process. But I've never had like an idea like this that I felt had some legs. And so I should continue to like take the next step along
Yeah.
that path, even though there's still a lot of uncertainty. And I imagine in terms of River and bringing that to life versus, I think it was Olivine was the name of the marketing
Olivine, yeah,
agency.
yeah.
Olivine. It is
Yeah,
a
it's
kind
like
of a different dynamic, right?
yeah, and it's like very predictable. And I like, obviously things come up, like Silicon Valley Bank has a bank run, and now all of a sudden you have to deal with that. Like stuff
Mm,
happens for sure, and it keeps it interesting. I'm not saying it's not interesting, but yeah, I mean, life is just all about like living a good story. And, I, something you said at the beginning reminded me that I've always seen my career as a playground, not a ladder. And so you're just like, let me just go over here on the monkey bars and see what's going on over here. And, you can always pivot, you can always change. Um, but then some really strong early traction for River came, like fell in my lap, and I was just like, oh shit, okay, like buckle up, buttercups, gotta try to strap in and see what we can do.
yep. If I remember correctly, like over the last 3 months or so, you guys had kind of secured funding for your pre-seed round. Can you tell
We
me a
did.
little bit about like
Yeah.
both the last 12 months and the lead up to securing that funding, and also maybe like what your plans are for the next 12 months in terms of how you're going to be allocating some of those resources?
Yeah, yeah. So we had some really early easy wins that I'm not sure set me up for success later on for raising a pre-seed round. So,
Mm,
JCal invested the 100 grand, no lines of code had been written. We like then we put together an MVP, and we like I guess 2 months later we came out with an MVP for like a small events app. But we're a single community events app, and we're just hosting unofficial side events around All In Summit in LA, the second
mm,
year of the summit. And yeah, got that out the door. And then somehow I got Balaji Srinivasan as our second investor. It's still like a little unclear. I was a big fan of his. I listened to his entire Lex Friedman episode, which was 8 hours long, the day it came out, and had read the Network State and watched the Network State conference in Amsterdam. And actually, my founding engineer Andrew Pinch went to that event in person, and so I was a huge fan of his. And a friend of mine, Taylor, who was at the women's brunch that I hosted, she had tweeted saying that Balaji was going to be hosting an AMA on Farcaster, and if you want to get your ideas in front of him, that's probably like the best place to do it because it's still a nascent platform and not that many people are on there. Like, okay, so I'm like, doop doop, like, what is this app? Let me try to download it. I don't consider myself like that Web3. native. I own some crypto, but if you had asked me before I started River, what is Web3? I'd be like, I don't know. But I like download this Firecaster app and I ask my question. It's just a text AMA that, that you ask your question ahead of time and then he just jumps in and responds to people.
Hmm.
And so I said, hey, I watched the network state, really interesting ideas laid out. How are you going to be connecting some people in person? Are you thinking about IRL at all to bring forward the ideas of the network state? Um, is this important to you? And no one liked my little question, so I'm like, okay, he's gonna skip it. You know how usually they respond to the most liked questions.
Hmm.
He responded and he said, yes, I'm thinking a lot about this. In fact, this is the top three things I'm thinking about. And if you would like to help, get a Loom account. And I was like, oh, shit. um, so I reply and I'm just like, hey, I'd love to help, but I can tell you from personal experience that's not going to work, but I'm building something. I'd love to show you what it is. Turns out later on, he thought that I was like some kind of bot because I had a real photo of myself, not like a NFT thing, which
Hmm.
apparently, the world's turned upside down. So if you have a real
Yeah.
photo, that means you're a bot. Um, but he sent Akshay, BD, who's like seems to be a good friend of his, uh, to like suss me out on Twitter. So I'm like talking to Akshay in Twitter DMs, and uh, anyway, we start talking. I end up like getting on the call with Akshay at like midnight my time to give him a product demo, and he's like, "Okay, Balaji's gonna want to meet you and invest." And I was like, what?" I thought he was
Wow.
just blowing smoke like straight up my ass. I was just like, "Okay, we'll see." Um, and then like we hang up, and then like a WhatsApp chat is started with Balaji. Then like 3 seconds later, and I'm like,
Hmm.
"Holy crap!" And then the next morning, my phone's ringing, and I'm like, "Oh my God, it's Balaji. What should I do?" And Ryan's like, "Answer it." So yeah, I just told him what I was building, and then he invested. So he invested 50 grand. He offered 100 grand, but I didn't want to be that diluted at the same terms as Jason, so I talked him down to 50. Um, and that was pretty much it. So we had like these two really early signals that made me think that raising money was gonna be super easy. Um, oh, by the way, funny story. When I like talking to Balaji, by the way, the call was like 10 minutes long. It's very short, but I was like, hey, I listened to your entire Lex episode, and I don't know if you know this, but it came out the same day as the Midnight's album by Taylor Swift, which I also listened to in its entirety on the same day. It was a weird day. And he was like, long, painful pause, and he's just like, okay. And they moved on. I was like,
Oh, that's amazing.
oh shit. Oh, great. Just great. Love that. Love that for me. Um, but anyway, so we made the 150 grand last the whole year. So I've got two co-founders, Bernie and Ryan. Ryan's my husband. We've worked a lot together over the years, and then Bernie, we both worked with and met at Sauce Labs, which is the first startup I ever worked at. So the three of us took no salary for a year. That was very hard on our total household income. And we put all the money towards found two of our early engineers, and just like built like hell. We felt like we had real conviction in the market because All In would be a customer. This Week in Startups, Jason's other podcast, and then My First Million had also said, "Hey, this is interesting. We want to use this." So I felt like I had a lot of conviction, and so I'm not saying I was cocky going into fundraising, but I did not think it was going to take 6 months and like 100 million meetings. And we got really close so many times, but we're kind of like a Web 2.5 company. We have a lot of Web 3 components in our company and in our app, which I totally did on not on purpose. You know, I'm 38-year-old lady. Like I'm not like super in with the cool kids. But apparently a lot of the notions of my ideas are actually very Web3. So we have a Web3 company. And
Hmm.
so a lot of Web3 investors were like, well, you're not Web3 enough. And then a lot of Web2 investors, like normal, I call them like normies or muggles, they were like, what's all this Web3 stuff? Like, we don't want anything to do with that. So we're just like in this rock and a hard place for like
Hmm.
quite a while. And so it really took a long time to put the round together, about 6 months. And luckily, Solana Foundation did an equity grant, a convertible equity grant for us,
Hmm.
and they basically like saved us for because it was 25 grand and I wasn't gonna be able to make payroll.
Wow.
So that helped us survive it, and then we just closed a $1.6 million pre-seed round.
Wow. Wow. Well, congratulations on that. It sounds it sounds like
Thanks.
it
I
was a journey.
hated it. Thanks. I'm not good at fundraising at all.
Mm.
Um, just like a lot of vision casting, and I'm like a bootstrap operator,
Yep.
where I'm just like, well, we'll see.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, so probably vision casting is a weakness of mine.
Um, which is it's funny because I wanted to ask you about this as well. Like, because of your marketing background, like one of the things that has been kind of powerful for me personally is even in launching this kind of digital ecosystem for the Korean diaspora. One of the things that I think has been advantageous that I didn't realize is because I was already hosting a podcast, because I was already producing like a monthly newsletter that I'd send out to friends and family, because I had stood up a website and all of this stuff. It created the building blocks for me to start this digital community a lot more easily than it otherwise would have been if I just had the idea but I didn't have those experiences. And I'm sometimes curious about like how path dependency kind of affects people's career trajectories and their skill sets. Do you feel like there was a lot from founding the marketing agency in terms of like skill sets that ended up transferring over to River, or do you look at those as pretty independent experiences for the most part?
No, no, super, super useful. I mean, you know, and it is kind of in a way annoying because some of our investors, they're like, you gotta do go to market, you gotta, and I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like, some of the top tech companies in the world have hired me to take their products to market. I know how to take a product to market. We have to build this thing though, because it needs to be a lot smoother and snappier because I don't want to burn my pipeline. I don't want to pack a top of funnel and then not have it convert because we don't have an onboarding. It's like the app is very powerful, but you get dropped in the middle of the jungle. Like there's
Mm.
no guidance at all. You just have to know what the features do and guess how to use them. So we've been improving that. Yeah, and so I would say, I know how to hire a team. I know how to manage a remote workforce. I did help close a few rounds of funding when I worked in a finance and operations role at Sauce Labs. I can read a P&L. I know how to build an operating plan. Like I know how to operate and I know how to get eyeballs. And I know how to get distribution on my app and what I'm building. But, that's all a little more short-sighted. I would say, you know, convincing investors when you're creating a kind of really a new market for events and convincing them of the TAM.
Mm.
That's just like a different kind of vision casting. I think a marketer kind of vision casts out like a year. They're like, oh, the product will do this, in
Yep.
a year. But vision casting like to, 100 million ARR and 10 years out, a little harder to do.
Mm. Yep.
And to really convince people that you're going to be able to tackle all these different verticals. A lot of So what I was saying is, I think a lot of investors they give certain feedback. I have to be careful which feedback I take because I think most startups are started by a software engineer, someone who writes code and doesn't know
Mm.
how to do marketing and doesn't know how to produce events and doesn't know how to get distribution and eyeballs. And so sometimes I think that the kind of typical investor advice is talking to that kind of that dev who just wants to like write and hack code from their cave and never talk to anyone.
Yeah.
I don't write code, so I'm a totally different kind of founder. So I have to be careful kind of listening to their advice sometimes because I'm like, well, yeah, I think you're just over indexing on engineers. I'm not an engineer, so it's different. I think in the future,
Mm.
though, side note, I think a lot more unicorns will be founded by marketers in the future just because we have so many no code apps. I think, web development has just made leaps and bounds with ChatGPT and all these tools, and that really distribution is going to be king. Um, so I think there'll be more founders who are marketers in the future. But yeah, I think all these skill sets are really helpful. But yeah, just not helpful for fundraising
Mm.
because
Yeah.
there's just a lot of vision casting that I'm just like, I'll show you. I'll show you what I can do, but I'm
Mm.
not great at confidently telling you that this is what the world will look like in 5, 10 years. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess just two pieces of commentary on your response. Like one is the like potentially marketers or people that don't have technical chops of the more likelihood that they can become pretty powerful founders themselves. Like I wonder how much in 100 years from now, looking back at like the evolution of the startup landscape, how much the computer science skill set is really going to be a thing of like the early 2000s. It was common, and then with each cycle, it's just whatever I guess knowledge or talent is super scarce at that time. Because it really seemed like if you wanted to be a startup founder before, you just had to have those technical skill sets. Whereas now, more and more,
Absolutely.
even people that I'm coming across, it's like they don't really have that, or they have enough of it just to put pieces and puzzles together. But it's not like at
Totally.
a fundamental level they understand like the detailed computer science of how things interact with each other. And it really feels like even the
Totally.
sample set that I've had is like so many of those people. I just interviewed this guy Quang Do, who is the founder of Overseas Vietnamese, which is the Vietnamese diaspora kind of digital ecosystem that I had mentioned briefly. And he had a Google kind of sales background, and he hadn't touched any code, but he was able to put together a really strong like digital ecosystem for his community. And so more and more, I'm
Amazing.
seeing those types of profiles come up as well.
Honestly, you just gotta be able to talk, like get all these tools to talk to each other. And I would consider myself a pretty technical marketer in the sense that like I can use Zapier, I can write an SQL query, I can set up some DNS in GoDaddy. Like, I can definitely make some stuff happen. And I also know how a lot of things work. A lot of engineers, they actually don't know the marketing tools available to them, or they think
Mm,
that they have to like their instinct is to build everything from scratch. I'm like, no, no, just use that tool. Like it already
yeah.
does it. And they're like, oh my God, they're blown away by all these tools that work. So my kind of joke is I was at some demo day, like judging, like going around like helping judge or whatever. And so many of the young engineers, they'd be like, I rebuilt YouTube from scratch. I'm like, does it work? And they're like, oh no, definitely not. And I'm like, you I asked you to remodel a bathroom and you're hand chiseling this toilet that, by the way, doesn't flush. Just buy the things and arrange them and make sure they plugged in.
Yeah.
So I do think a lot of engineers try to do things the hard way. And because I'm not technical, sometimes I just find this really scrappy, quick, no code way to do something. I'm like, oh, I'll just
Mm.
use Zapier. Oh, I'll just use Typeform. Oh, I'll just do this. And I think it's almost because like my hands are tied. I kind of have to, I have a bunch of engineers now, so they they they're incredible and I can never do what they do. But I'm just saying sometimes it helps to be a little ignorant about like building everything from scratch because then you're like, oh, let me just look around, see what there
Mm.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other point that I was going to make just on what you shared was like the I think maybe bringing something into existence that is novel and new, and also getting investors on board, the whole casting a vision, a much bigger picture in terms of 10, 20 years, what this could become, it gives you a lot more of a appreciation for the fine line between like BS and reality. Because like so often in the startup landscape, you see people who in hindsight, it looks like what they were espousing was ridiculous, and the fact that they were able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars just seems outrageous, right? The whole like Theranos stuff or the FTX scandal, or just like many examples like that. But then you look at like successful examples like Steve Jobs or other people who were also like radical visionaries, and at the time when they were casting out that vision, they're really like in terms of hardcore substance, a lot of it wasn't mature enough to fulfill the vision that they were kind of espousing. But it really gives you, I think, maybe a bit of humility around just how hard walking that fine line is.
Yeah, and like you also don't want to delude yourself. Like you know, you only have so many years in this body and on this planet, and
Yeah.
you need to work on the correct things. And there was a period of time before we closed our round that, and frankly, this could still be true. I'm just like, is rubber a beautiful tar pit that everyone wants to exist? They love the idea of connecting people IRL, and they love, which by the way, I can talk more a little bit about how rubber works, because I don't think people get it. But is it a beautiful tar pit that like everyone wants to exist? They love the idea of it. It feels so good, but there's no business model. Like
Yep.
does it work? So I don't want to delude myself. Like I'm 38. I don't want to waste my time working on bullshit that isn't going anywhere.
Hmm.
I don't want to waste anyone's time. I don't want to waste my founding engineer's time. Like we all have short lives and need to building meaningful things. So, yeah, who knows? It's yeah, it could be a beautiful tar pit. I don't think it is because I'm working on it. But I do think you have to not delude yourself. And obviously, there's grit and perseverance and keeping going and not giving up. But then there's insanity.
Yes, yes. I totally hear you there. In terms of River today and the partnerships that you guys have with specific creators, and like if I were a follower of the All In podcast and wanted to attend a meetup through River, in terms of operationally how that works, could you give maybe a brief example or overview there?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a few different use cases. The kind of classic one is worldwide meetups. So we will spin up save the date events all around the world for all in. So it'll be like, app.getriver.io/all in because I can't afford real domains. But we will spin up save the date events all around the world. The events are geolocated. So if you're in Seoul, you'll see a Seoul event nearest to you. If I'm
Mm.
near Boston, I'll see Boston. You can click on the event and RSVP, register to attend. And if you do, it's like a normal event app, or maybe like a little bit of a crappier one because we're still early and we're still like working on a bunch of UX issues. But, for all intents and purposes, it's you register to attend just like a normal event app.
Mm.
Or you can apply to host. And the event only happens if a host steps up and makes it happen. So they apply, they have to they have to have their bio filled out. At this point, a lot of hosts are repeat hosts and they have a great host rating. But you get vetted, you get like lightly vetted, and then once you're approved to host, that event is yours, and you can say what time it's going to be, how many people can be there. You set the location. Depending on the community, you get access to the emails or you don't. It depends. That's like in the community owner, like All In is in the driver's seat, and those hosts don't get emails right now. Um, but you have everything you need to make the event happen. You can send messages to attendees, and then you kind of just like inherit this guest list of like really interesting people, and then you put yourself in the kind of like hosting has a really high ROI on networking, and so because everyone wants to meet the host, um, and so anyway, all these events end up happening because no one has to actually, like, each host just steps up and makes them happen. And then they get reminders to set locations. And if the event doesn't get a host, we will email the attendees and say, hey, last chance to step up and host. Don't make a big deal out of it. Just pick a pub, go to a coffee shop, meet in the park. And a lot of times that will convert into a host. And then if there isn't, then it just gets deleted. We say, hey, sorry, we couldn't make it happen this time, maybe next time. But the scale is insane, like insane. So,
Mm.
All In has hosted over 300 events just on River, and that doesn't include the other events I used to plan. Um, Tim Ferriss, he celebrated the 10th anniversary of his podcast. He announced the events on River. 3 weeks later, 154 events happened all in one day.
Wow.
Um, Super Team, who they're a Web3 community, they're part of Solana ecosystem. It did not take them that seriously when they first reached out because they only have 40,000 Twitter followers, which is a little small for, our kind of communities right now on River. You have to have a critical mass for it to really work out.
Hmm.
We're working to change that, but for, it's easier if you have a lot of followers. So I didn't take them that seriously because, compared to All In or Tim Ferriss, much fewer followers. These lunatics have gotten together 1,200 times this year. They have
Wow.
24,000 people who have are registered to attend events on River, and they've had 1,200 like events that have happened, not listed events, like events that have had a host and a location and people checking in. It's crazy. And some of the hosts or some of the attendees, they're like annoyed because they like the old event platform they were using before, but it's like, well, you only had 20 events all year long.
Hmm.
Now you've had 1,200 events this year. Like it's insane the sheer magnitude of what can happen. So, it's River is a little bit like everyone wants to compare themselves to Uber, but Uber didn't have to buy a fleet of cars and like hire and train drivers. They just like made it possible for these things to emerge, and that's what we've done.
And so both the kind of save the date type of format and like the one-off events as well. So for example, if I just wanted to host my own kind of
Oh
all-in
yeah, you
meetup
can
event,
propose. Yeah, you can
I see.
propose that event on River. So we do like campaigns where we'll try to like get everyone like moving in the same direction. And that's when the all-in besties will say, "Hey, go to the 200 episode events or go." And that's like a campaign. Or
I
you
see.
can just be like, "Hey, I'm a founder in Seoul and I just want to host an all-in theme meetup." And then you can propose the event. Very likely it'll get approved. And then if it does get approved, anyone who's in our database who's following All In, who's in the Seoul area, will get notified, hey, Tiger's hosting an All In event. You should go.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And the vetting process right now, in terms of ensuring that the hosts are not crazy or insane, is that done by like the all in their team, or is it done mostly by you guys, or it just depends on the preference?
It depends. So for All In, it's like me and Anna, or Anna does it just because like it's weird because like I'm the founder of River, but I'm also like the community owner of All In. Um, and so in that case, it's kind of like a dual role. But some communities have a designated person that vets them. So sometimes they pay us extra and we do it. It's actually pretty lightweight. You just kind of we have questionnaires that you can fill out. You look at their profile, bio, you click on their social. You can kind of thin slice it. I mean, sometimes we're wrong, but you can thin slice it. And then certain territories are less competitive than others. Like New York will spend more time looking because it's such an important city. Whereas like Cincinnati might only have one host that steps up. And it's like, yeah, great. We would rather have an event happen and like start with trust. And then if the host gets a bad rating, they're blocked from the platform. So there's not like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of risk in trying it out. But then other communities like This Week in Startups for Jason Calacanis, he has Founder Fridays and it is very vetted. It is for founders by founders, no service providers, no lawyers, no accountants, no consultants. Nobody can show up to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a lot more vetted, but they have someone, Cassidy runs that program brilliantly. Um, so they have someone to kind of stay on top of that. And like when I get hate mail, it's because like a lawyer or some service provider has been blocked, has been rejected from hosting because like they're not what that community is looking for. And then they send me
Mm.
hate mail, which further proves that there would be a terrible host because they can't just take it on the chin, you know?
Yep, yep. So I guess out of in terms of direction, it seems like on the one hand, if you get these like big time creators that have massive audiences, that becomes a huge kind of tailwind for River. And then I guess on the other hand, if the technology gets better to be more plug and play dynamic so that even smaller creators with smaller audiences who still want to utilize River for themselves in a more like easy fashion, like that's another maybe model. Are you guys experimenting on both
Yes.
ends, or are you moving towards one versus the other?
We would love to, I call it going like down market to smaller communities. It's just, um, we can only focus on like certain areas at one time. So just trying to kind of nail this bigger one at the moment. And then, yeah, so really focus on that. But we have a few core use cases. So, you know, one is that kind of worldwide activation I said, where it's like all in episode 200 around the world. Another one, we're actually working with Utah Tech Week, and it's all side events, all in one place.
Hmm.
So, you know, thousands of people fly into Salt Lake City for the week, and all these events are propping up. And so, a lot of Tech Weeks will end up like Google Sheets will emerge, and it's like a big mess. But Utah Tech Week is like orienting around River. So we've let it so that anyone can post any external event. It doesn't have to be a River event, it can be any kind of event, but it's all listed and sorted and organized on River. And then we also have like a sponsorship marketplace. So sponsors, so just like someone can apply to host, someone can apply to sponsor your event to help get their brand out there and help cover the costs of hosting the event.
Hmm.
So that's all being managed. So that kind of like tech week, you know, side event use cases there. And then we have a third, two other use cases. One is IRL watch parties. So Super Team, they're this subset of Solana. They host a monthly ecosystem call where Kash Danda talks about everything that's going on in Solana. And you can tune in on Zoom or YouTube from home, or you can go to an IRL watch party. but they're snapped to the live time of the show. So some of the watch parties are at like 7 a.m. and some of them are like midnight. It depends where you are in
Mm.
the world. But people like 100 of these happen every month where they like go to the watch party. So that's kind of fun. And I've heard, I won't reveal who, but I've heard like big podcaster wants to do IRL watch parties on River where you tune into the live event if you're at the watch party. But if you don't show up in person, then you just get the scrubbed, edited version later on Spotify or YouTube,
Mm.
which is a cool use case. And then the third use case, we're rolling out with Reading Rhythms. They are like reading raves, parties for introverts. They started in New York. It's BYOB, Bring Your Own Book.
Mm.
It's not a book club. Everyone's reading their own book, but
Yeah.
these are paid events that they're doing, and they were struggling to expand beyond New York. And so we've built out a whole like membership chapter platform where it's like revenue sharing with the hosts. So that's a fourth use case that we're working on. So we're staying focused on those for now. But hopefully, maybe in the next 6 months, I'd love to launch category pages or like city pages so more like kind of smaller hosts or smaller communities can start getting a lot of distribution and people managing their events and coming to River. But yeah, right now, if you're just hosting a couple of events a month, there's platforms that are probably smoother for that. So I'm not trying to win there right now.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And you said when you had first founded River, I think there were like two co-founders or something like that. In
I
terms
have
of
two
like what the
co-founders.
the team looks like today, has it expanded over the last 12 to 15 months?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got Bernie and Ryan as co-founders, and then Andrew is our founding engineer. Ed's another engineer. We just brought on Lemmy. Lemmy's in where is he? Nigeria? Kenya? I think he's in Kenya.
Mm.
Ed's in Brazil. Andrew's in Austin, Texas, and then Anna. She's been with me since Olivine. She's our director of customer success. She's based in Zurich. We have two part-time engineers, one in Poland, one in Portugal. That's all of us. Yeah. So I think there's like, oh, we have a sales advisor. So I think there's like 9 of us loosely, but not everyone's full-time.
What I think you had mentioned that the one of the co-founders was your partner, your husband. Just like
Mm-hmm.
that dynamic and how you guys share responsibilities. Like I feel like that could very much be a double-edged sword. But I'm curious,
Oh, totally.
kind of how that all works out and what that experience has
How
been
it
like.
works? Yeah. How
Yeah.
does it work? No, I mean, for the most part, it works great. He's a data scientist. He actually used to be a mechanical engineer and then shifted into data science. I used to be in finance, shifted to marketing. So we don't really have overlapping skill sets. So there's not a lot to like argue about. But we've worked together many times. I was like still in college when we got married. He worked at a mechanical design firm. They needed like part-time help. I went to work there. When we first moved out to San Francisco, sight unseen, showed up with a suitcase. I got a bartending job, and like the bar back got fired, and I'm like, oh, Ryan could work. So we worked together. And then when I worked, I got a job first at Sauce Labs, a startup, and they ended up needing like a network technician in the data center, and they like I had nothing to do with it. They ended up hiring Ryan, even though they knew we were married.
Huh.
So we worked together many times, like officially. And then we've also done a lot of projects together. So we've like tried a couple other startups that just didn't go anywhere. We won a hack week together. With our friend Jonah, we went to Miami Hack Week and it's a week long hackathon. We won first place and we won best use of OpenAI. So we've like worked together many times and we've been married for eternity. I think 16 years, but we've been together for like 18. Yeah. So it's just like, we're codependent. We do everything together. And I was like, he really at first didn't want to do it with me because he's like, this
Mm.
is crazy. Woman, you're crazy. And I was like, but I painted the picture. I'm like, listen, you're gonna be so involved anyway because I'm gonna be never gonna shut the fuck up about this thing. And so you might as well like have some equity and like skin in the game for all your grief that you're gonna experience. And
Yeah.
then I was like, just like our lives will be so in sync because like when River's crazy, like both be crazy. But then
Mm-hmm.
when River's chill, like we'll both be chill.
Yeah.
Or like when we go to All In Summit, when I go to All In Summit for like work, what, you're not gonna come? Like we're gonna be like speaking on a like giving a talk or like speaking. You don't want to come? You don't want to talk? Like you don't want to do it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, okay, And he has fantastic product instincts. He just like despises the title product manager. He fucking hates this title, but he's so good at making sure we build just enough, just the right thing, and staying
Mm.
on task and like really creative at solving problems. And then his data science comes in handy. We haven't really flexed that muscle yet, but I know we will as like the data starts rolling in. And um, so yeah, he's in.
That's awesome. You've been able to pull him along.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, I promise the next startup we do can be yours. Like whatever you want. Like I will, because he probably wants to do something like hardware, robotics, or whatever someday. I'm like, I'm there for you, babe.
Mm.
I will make this for you. Um, yeah. So, but he's been fantastic. Has a lot of insights. And when I look back on the past 18 months, I'm like, I can legitimately say we've probably wasted like 4 days of development because he's just so focused and like so
Mm.
on about what we should be building and just solving exactly just enough to like get to the next, you know, the next round, the next layer.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, even just like founder journeys in general, it seems like the loneliness dimension is oftentimes one of the hardest hurdles to work through, and it seems like it would be pretty powerful to have your significant other that you can empathize with throughout the ups and
Yeah.
downs. That seems like a pretty amazing thing. If it works,
Yes.
obviously, there's a lot of caveats there.
Yeah. No, and like, incentives are aligned, for sure. Like, but I will say, as a married couple, and being married is a lot more common for co-founders, like the Eventbrite co-founders, Canva co-founders. There's so many
Mm.
married co-founders. I think I would caution if you just got married or you haven't been together that long. But, as soon as our investors, they were like, "You're married?" I'm like, "Yeah, 16 years." They're like, "Oh, never mind." They just know you've been through the ringer with it.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're just like had a whirlwind romance and got married 3 months later, like maybe not. But uh, incentives are aligned. What was I gonna say? You were saying something. Oh, this is what I was gonna say. The highs are high and the lows are low when
Mm.
you're both in it. It is like it can be brutal, brutally low because there isn't that other person's like, oh well, I had a great day at work. Let me tell you about it. It's like, oh shit, we're both just chewing this glass. So the household, like the emotions in the household can be very like driven by River's like success or failure. So that can be really challenging.
Mm. And I was wondering this as well, and I don't think I came across it. But in terms of River and why you guys decided to name it River, is there any like backstory, or what's the reason why?
Yes, I could have picked a much easier name to rank in SEO domains on. Yeah, so I wanted it to, I'm a marketer, so I've seen lots of bullshit names that like no one can spell. So I
Mm.
wanted it to be easy to spell, easy to pronounce. I was kind of looking for a poker term as like an homage to All In, and River
Mm.
is the last card in the deal. Um, and then I like words that start with R. I'm Ray. My husband's name's Ryan. And then Anna, who helped me build All In Meetups, she's been there from the beginning. Her last name's Rivera.
Uh,
And then if you want to be like woo woo about it, rivers collect small bodies of water and like bring them to large bodies of water, and it just
hmm.
it just kind of like made a lot of sense. Definitely can't afford any like river.com domains. But that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I thought it sounded great. My first name that I had, Rafa, no one likes, so I ditched that. That would have been a little easier to rank on SEO, but I was like, SEO's dead anyway. Who cares?
Yeah, well, I think River is a great name. And when you had said the highs can be really high and the lows can be really low, I'm just curious in terms of the last 15 months that since you have started River, in terms of what those look like on both ends of the spectrum. Are there specific points that are like, yes, this was the definite low and this was the definite high?
Yeah, I mean, right before we close, I would say there's this like 3-day window where the investor I thought was going to say yes said no, and then investor I definitely thought was going to say no ended up saying yes. So like
Mm.
3-day like trench of despair. I was like, it's over. We got to figure out something else to do. Yeah, so that and just like, are we wasting our time? Like, did we just spend a year building something for no reason? Have I hurt everyone's like net worth because they all like took pennies or no money to work at the startup all year. Um, I take people's livelihoods and like providing for people and giving great work environments and well-paying jobs like very seriously. It's like a huge point of pride for me. So like failing that is very difficult, very
Mm.
painful. I wasn't like embarrassed because like tons of people can't raise and that isn't it. It's just like, oh, I felt like we were so close. But yeah, one investor said no, and they're like, oh, the revenue wasn't there yet. And we had just launched our pricing like 4 months before. And I was like, oh, curious, like what revenue would have made this like a yes, an easy yes.
Hmm.
And they said 1 million ARR. And I was
Wow.
like, dude, if I had 1 million ARR after launching pricing 4 months ago, I wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be rubbing cocoa butter on myself in Bali because I would be the shit. Oh, definitely would not be like trying to get money from you, my friend. And then another company that we pitched to and our demo went horribly wrong.
Mm.
I was like, they're not going to invest, and they're all like mostly German, so they just give like zero indication. I'm like, oh, they hate us. They think we're idiots. Our demo didn't go well. We're doomed. So they're definitely going to be a no. I don't even need to wait for the no. I know that's a no. But then they were a yes. And I was like, oh man. And then that's the thing about funding is like, it's so binary. You just need like one lead investor
Mm.
and then the whole thing clicks in.
Yep.
But if you don't, which is so frustrating because as like a business owner, who I've been running a company before, you're never like living and dying on one customer, like one decision. It's all in the numbers and in the volume of it, and that's not how it is with investing. And that was definitely the most stressful time of River. I mean, I've kind of seen a lot of shit growing up, and so I do have a certain kind of perspective. I'm like, no one's dying, we're all safe. So there is a certain kind of perspective there, but um, yeah. And then I'd say highs, like, I mean, Balaji investing was just huge, just like a huge lift and vote of confidence. And then, yeah, just getting some really big names on the platform early on. Like, I knew All In and This Week in Startups would be in because Jason invested and, nudge, nudge. But like getting my first million, getting Brian Johnson, getting Tim Ferriss. Tim
Hmm.
Ferriss was insane. And I can tell this story real quick. So the reason Ryan and I switched careers and left our careers in Boston is because we read The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss.
Mm.
Ryan read it first. He was just like at Barnes and Nobles. Those still used to exist. And he's like, Rachel, you gotta read this book. So I read this book, and then we like went to a coffee shop and like had a meeting about the book. And I was like, what's angel investing? What's Silicon Valley?
Wow.
And that is really what got us interested in San Francisco and startups. We ended up like relocating there sight unseen, moved our whole lives there to try to break into startups. Um, so when Tim tweeted, hey, my 10th anniversary of the pod is coming up, what wild and crazy ideas do you all have for how we should celebrate? I just like instantly dropped everything I was doing to reply to this tweet. And I'm just like, oh my God, please, Tim, this would be perfect for you. Perfect, perfect for us.
Mm.
So when he reached out like 2 days later, I was like, oh, damn, it's on. So that was really fun. Huge high. Yeah. And then
Wow.
another high was once we closed our round, I brought everyone up to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where we live, and we had an offsite. We did an overnight hike up Mount Washington. That was kind of insane. Cracked open some lobsters. So really just being able to celebrate with the team of all the hard work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, I think that through Tim Ferriss, I had come across Kevin Kelly, and Kevin Kelly has a quote that goes something like, "On the day before I die, on my deathbed, I'd like to be able to say that I have like fully become myself." Right, and I feel like
Mm,
the professional application of that is if you look at somebody's career trajectory, it's like with each iteration of their career experience, they're doing something that like more and more aligns with like what their passions and interests and what they can offer the world. And I don't want to speak for you, but it does seem like with each iteration of the career move, that's you've been pushing in a direction that's
totally.
like more of like what who you are, and what
Totally.
you have to offer. So that's really cool to see.
Yeah. I mean, I've been like a longtime reader of Ikigai and just being like, if you ever like print out, do this exercise at home, people. print out there's like a circular graph Venn diagram, four-part graph, and it's, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you can make money, and what you enjoy. And just like write a little dot on of all your past jobs. You're like, okay, well, I wasn't good at that, and the world didn't need it, hated it, didn't make any money, X, and so I feel like I've been kind of like like encircling this kind of this thing that only I can do. And I think that's what my advice for people is when they're trying to find their thing. Because like I would never dream that I'm building this company, never.
Mm.
But like I had a curiosity with All In. I felt like there was something special. I didn't know what would come of it, but I was excited by it. So I just like kind of went with it. And um, yeah, I just think if you can stop looking at what everyone else is doing and really just try to find the thread of the thing only you can do, you'll be able to carve out a space for yourself much easier.
Mm. Mm. Well said. Yeah. In terms of, I guess you've closed the whole funding round and all of that craziness. You've got a little bit of runway just to focus. In terms of like what most gets you excited about River and its future, I guess are there specific things that are especially energizing for you, like near term?
Yeah, I'd love to get new types of communities on the platform. Right now, a bunch of investors, like when we were fundraising, were like, how come all of your customers are tech Twitter bros? And I was like, well, I'm a tech Twitter bro. That's why. Those are the people I know.
Yeah.
So I have my sights on Mr. Beast. I would love for him to send his young fans to do 1,000 river park ocean cleanups around the world. And maybe they all collect footage of their hard work, and then he puts together a highlight reel, and he comes throws a pizza party for whichever city like had the best cleanup project.
Mm.
I think that would be really cool, because podcast bros getting together for drinks, like, sure, it is interesting, and people are building real friendships and meeting their partners and building companies together. That's amazing, but I'd love to expand it beyond that. I think musicians or, Taylor Swift could host like album drop parties on River. That'd be fun.
Mm.
Um, Selfishly, I like F1, but like the chances of me flying to Abu Dhabi to see a race are low. So it'd be cool if I could like meet other F1 fans and we could go watch the race together. And I also think political campaigns, I'm not a particularly political person, but I'm really frustrated by how campaign finance works. And I think it'd be really interesting if a political campaign was on River and supporters could step up and host events. The events could be paid, and you would know that all the proceeds were going to the campaign. I think that could be interesting because I just think there's this chasm. You can either donate like $20 or $100 online, and then, yeah, I don't know, there's no experience that goes with it. Or you can pay, $5 grand for dried chicken at this overpriced gala because it's really about who's in the room or something. I think there's kind of a chasm of political donations and activism that I think could be powered by River. Yeah, and then I think we'll see if more along the reading rhythms line, like if some of these kind of clubs or run clubs can use it to get together, that'd be great. But yeah, more than just tech Twitter bro drink ups.
Yep, yep. And it sounds like you are not starved for opportunities or experiments to run, which is really cool. And I think for myself, it's like the realization of, Balaji's Nation State book. I had read that in recent months, and that was pretty deeply influential and just having more conviction about there's a lot more experiments worth running in kind of the digital ecosystem and how that translates to IRL. And I think the common notion that I had in the back of my mind was the whole like, if you get enough people to crowdfund buying out like a piece of land or creating some co-living space, like that is like one example. But in terms of what you're doing kind of the same thesis, but it's in a more fragmented, dispersed way. And it's still like an in real life manifestation of kind of Balaji's thesis. But when I started to see like popular creators like organize massive meetups and like take over a mall or something. That's when it started to become more real of like, okay, we are in this next phase where there are going to be new forms of infrastructure that are needed. And so I'll be very
Yeah.
curious to see like River and all of its applications over the course of the next few years. And I'm very excited for it as well.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll try to build the picks and shovels for that. And I'm also really inspired by the network state. I think to me, a lot of these notions of decentralization and like shared ownership and kind of building status in the community. Something that's annoying to me is just we kind of look at Twitter followers as as a proxy for status, where
Yep.
whenever I move to a new city, New York, San Francisco, Miami, it's so hard to find the real connectors, the person who's really going to help you and like meet you, because Keith Rabois is like constantly tweeting about Miami, but like, is he going to respond to a DM or like meet me for coffee? Hell no. It's the people. It's the Rachel Azeroffs of Miami who have like whatever 1,500 followers on Twitter who know
Mm.
everyone and host and they like are so giving, and so I really want to build that kind of status for people on River, people who are really showing up or creating experiences for people. But I would actually like to start my own network state someday. My husband and I would love to buy a big plot of land and start a hacker city in northern New Hampshire, which
Amazing.
is crazy, I know. But I'm like, you know what? I've met so many people who have made me realize that sometimes you might just be lacking audacity. It's not that they're that much smarter than you, it's just they had a more audacious goal.
Mm.
Um, So yeah, if I can make River do well, I think we could start a little a city, a little town up north.
In terms
It'd
of
be cool.
building the baby steps to get there, I mean, you're quite well positioned in terms of already having Balaji on board and building River and all of that stuff. So I think the
Yeah, I
opportunity
mean,
is there
although
for you
he's
more than anybody else.
yeah, I mean he's very busy. I don't talk to him that much, but yeah, I have a plan if you want to hear it.
Tell
The
me,
plan would be
please.
to seed it with two businesses. So one would be a hotel. It would be like a kind of like an all-inclusive WeWork in the woods. This hotel would act as like a way for visitors to check out the town to see if they're interested in moving there, but also
Mm.
as a way of creating like dynamic energy for the people that live there. So you just like constantly have an influx of people coming. But it wouldn't be just like a normal bed and breakfast. It'd be very like tech builder focused. And then I think probably some kind of hardware, maybe hardware co-op or R&D kind of shop, where some companies could come and build there. So I think we would need like two businesses to seed it. But I've asked around, and the number of occupants that this town would need for people to be interested in moving is actually much lower than I expected. At first, I was like,
Mm.
"Oh no, we're gonna need like 1,000 people. We have to build 1,000 houses," and people are like, "Oh no, like 10 would be great." So
Wow.
I'm like, "Oh, okay." And some people laugh at me for this idea, but I'm like, "Fuck that." There's golf communities. I'm like, I don't want
Yep.
to play golf, but like, no one laughs at someone building like a golf condo association or retirement communities. Um, so I think it can be done, and it would be completely capitalistic, like not a cult. Um, yeah, it would need to all be like it would need to, maybe I'd subsidize like an F-45 or something, just so there's a really good gym. But yeah, I think it can be done. And so yeah, other people laugh and they're like, you can't just start a new city. I'm like, Vegas.
Mm. Yeah.
Also the entire United States. How did you think all these cities got here? So I think we need to spread out more. I think, I think the pitch would be, hey, you know, be around interesting people for half the cost of living in a
Mm.
big city, or a third of the cost. And I've seen so many people really, they're builders, they're makers, they have something really interesting to create in the world, but they just can't make it work with the expense of San Francisco or Brooklyn. And
Yep.
what if they could have half the operating costs and be around other interesting builders, and food. We got to solve food. We can't have like boring food, but we can solve these problems. Yeah.
100%. It is. even in deciding to kind of build my own digital ecosystem as well for people of Korean heritage, the question sometimes come up is why doesn't something like this already exist? And I'm sure it's probably the same thing with your experience with River. And it is
Yeah,
maybe humbling how often the answer sometimes is simply nobody has decided to like apply their will to manifest this thing into existence. And I more and more I am surprised at how often that ends up becoming the answer. Is some people want to say, because it's not economically feasible, you would never be able to get enough people on board to support something like that. But oftentimes it's just if there is a person with like a very strong will that is willing to take some risks and try and bring this thing into existence, there is no certainty that it will be self-sustaining or financially viable or all of that stuff, but it does seem like oftentimes the answer is the audacious response is people were just not audacious enough in tackling this issue.
totally. Or, like historically, most founders have been software engineers, and most software engineers are not community building host people.
Yeah.
They're introverts, and I'm an introvert as well. So I kind of laughed when you said you're an introvert because I'm like, oh, I'm an introvert. I started a fucking events company. Why did I do that? But maybe more because I was like tired of the big events and I wanted like tinier, smaller events. But yeah, I mean, people build for their own kind of taste. And I think we're just seeing the lid be blown right off with the ability of building things now where you don't have to be able to write, code. And, um, I even see like other event platforms and like, why aren't they building this? I'm like, I just don't think they knew that this was an opportunity. I don't think they knew that people wanted to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
so many investors or people will be like, yeah, but how do you find hosts? I'm like, no, 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 no. Not how do you find host. How do you let hosts down nicely who aren't a good fit for hosting so that
Mm.
they don't send you hate mail? Because I've got so much hate mail from people not being able
Ah,
to host because it's competitive and people want to do it. But like maybe that's the insight that other people didn't have.
yeah.
Or,
Do
and there's so
you
many other things like no one was going to sleep on anyone else's couch, like on Airbnb, or like you don't ride in the car with strangers. Like there's just so many things that we
mm.
do that we didn't used to do.
The host dynamic, do what is the economics in terms of the host? Do they pay to be a host? Do they get paid for being a host? Is there any like
I'd
process
love
there?
for
Is there
them to
any?
get paid.
Mm,
Yeah, they don't pay. The community pays. So like All In pays, This Week in Stars pay, Tim Ferriss
okay.
pays, and the host is kind of like doing the work
Yep.
of hosting a branded event on your behalf. And then by the way, during the event, River sends you an SMS saying, hey, don't forget to snap a pic and post on social. The link is pre-filled to tag Tim Ferriss or tag All In. So they get all this user-generated content from the events. So
Mm,
yeah, I would love for, there might be a world in the future where hosts who really are like kind of making this part of their growth strategy of their career, maybe they get some premium features or something.
yep.
But if you're just hosting a casual meetup on behalf of All In, I don't think you should pay. I think, in fact, we should line up sponsors and maybe you get it paid. You should at least get your beer for free. Your Uber
Yeah.
and your beer should be covered. So yeah, I don't think it's not going to change anybody's stars, but that's how I would like the financial model to go now. But yeah, right now, no host pay.
Yeah, it's interesting because you could even think of it as like the host is a primary customer, where it's like, okay, All In has like these like kind of fleet of hosts, and it's like a competitive dynamic where it's like the better hosts continue to get more opportunity, more economics, more large events that they can host if they're getting good reviews and people are saying,
Yes.
"Wow, this was an amazing experience," and you can kind of see it materializing in that way too.
Yeah, and the host dynamic is tough because like some of the best hosts, they don't like being throttled. They don't want to they want the
Mm,
emails of their attendees. They think it's totally rude that, All In doesn't give them or they blame us and I'm like, well, it's a community level setting that All In has decided to set that
yep.
hosts don't just get emails, but maybe we need to work out something where it's like, hey, proven hosts can get access to those emails. We're still kind of working out that dynamic because people definitely go around it. Um, but it's interesting because it's like, well, the best All In isn't going to promote like a bunch of one-off events when they don't know what's happening with that data. And also, All In doesn't have an email strategy. There's nowhere to like subscribe, and YouTube doesn't give you emails. Spotify doesn't give you emails. Twitter doesn't give you emails. So they have 10,000 emails from River
Mm,
that they can now use to kind of say, hey, we're hosting a summit. Hey, we're hosting a holiday party. Yeah, so those emails belong to the community. I think in the future we'll have to figure something out because really juicy hosts who are great, they definitely want the emails. So that's a given, a push and pull that we got to figure out.
For the listeners that are interested in following along with the Rae and River journey over the next couple of years, is the best place to do that on your social media?
Yeah, I'm more of a Twitter girl. I'm Rachel Lambert, but it's spelled Raechel Lambert. Yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter. I mean, I guess I'm on LinkedIn. Um, but yeah, I'm on Twitter. Love Twitter. Follow me there. Hit me up.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, it's been a pleasure to chat, and it's very exciting for me just because I'm kind of new to the space in terms of deciding to build my own ecosystem. But talking to other people that are building like critical pieces of the infrastructure, at least I think will be critical pieces of the infrastructure over the course of the next like decade, is really cool. And it was fun to hear your backstory as well. So thanks for joining the pod.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and my take on what you're building is like community is great. Even if you end up pivoting or doing something else, like the literal worst case scenario is that you'll know hundreds of people and you'll be better connected. There's like literally no
Yeah.
downside in building community. So, I don't know why more people don't do it, but it does take a certain level of consistency that kind of wears a lot of people out.
Mm,
And boundaries. I guess one of my tips is like having boundaries. I think a lot of community builders are too nice. And so they'll let one person kind of show up to the event and suck all the air out of the room and never
yeah.
talk to that person. But then no one else is going to complain. They're just going to stop showing up. So you kind of have to like have a little tough love sometimes. And I think a lot of community hosts are just naturally very nice and then they struggle with that. But it's not being that you're not being, you think you're being nice to that person, but you're just being not nice to everyone else. So it's really just about who you're being nice to, like protecting the herd.
Yes, yes, and I'm discovering this especially in the because I'm so early days and trying to be as thoughtful as possible. Is like there is almost a tendency to become, and this is maybe too harsh of a word, but like dictatorial in some sense of like laying the ground rules down and being like, if these are not values that you deeply resonate with, then this just is not for you. Because unfortunately, the
Totally.
asymmetry between the whole you let one bad apple in and they ruin the entire bunch is like a very true thing
They
with
do.
communities. Yeah.
Yeah, and people, I have this because I do the all in, and there's like a 2,500 people in the Slack, and someone will say something terrible, and terrible, like
Hmm.
super racist, whatever, and like all in people are very tolerant, by the way, like they're tolerant of a lot.
Yeah.
So if I'm like I have two companies, right? I have Olivine, which I'm more of like a board member. I have River, so like if I wake up and I get 7 DMs about you being an asshole. I will say, please apologize and remove your comment, or I'm going to kick you out. And then if you double down, you're out. And then, then they find me on Twitter, or they tweet about me about how I'm like a fascist and my community's going to be ruined. And that I should have like written a community playbook and should have been a three strikes policy. And I'm just like, fuck that. Like, you're an asshole. I know you're an asshole.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and spend 3 hours thinking of all the ways that you might be an asshole so that I can like cover, it's just like, I know, we all know, just stop it.
I very much
Yeah.
think I'm going to
That's
adopt
my,
that
that's,
approach with playbook as well.
yeah, I'm just like, what, why? What do you think I am? Just like cute little meetup manager girl who's just like sitting here like, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. Like, no, no one likes you, go home.
Oh, it's so good. Well, I hope we have the opportunity, maybe like a year from now, 2 years from now, to do a check-in as well
Let's
on the
do
progress
it.
of River. So, thanks so much
I'd
again.
love to.
This is great.
Thank you, Tiger. You're the best.